When it starts, I'll go. Okay, all right. Thank you very much. And hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us here at Gemini Melbourne for the NASA Space Apps Challenge. Here with us at the moment, we have John Tucker. John is an amazing person who's created and founded something called New Space Hub, or you might know it as New Space Ventures. And he's also an employee at SpaceX and has a really interesting history. And so we're really excited to talk to Jack, as his nickname is, as I found out recently, about his how did he get into this? How did he get into space? What is his background, and how did he come to develop the New Space Hub? So, for a bit of context, we've just held a workshop here on something called the Value Proposition Canvas, and basically turning an idea into a really successful project or maybe even a business. And so knowing Jack's story about how he came up with the idea for the New Space Hub and how it's turned into the huge global success that it is, this is a very topical thing. So Jack, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So Jack, could you just start off, tell us a bit about your history. How did you, what did you study at school? How did you, what did you do when you first graduated? And how did you get to SpaceX?
So it's a long, winding road to SpaceX. I never anticipated being in the space industry. I actually went to the Air Force Academy here in the United States. My intent was to become a pilot, but due to eyesight problems, that didn't quite work out. And I studied engineering at the academy. And after graduation, my first role as a commissioned officer in the Air Force was leading an engineering test team in Florida, in the Gulf of Mexico, and that taught me a lot. I got to blow stuff up in Florida, which was pretty cool. But I kind of figured out that living in the South isn't for me. It's not for some people. I grew up in Southern California, and so I wanted to make my way back home. And I knew that the United States Air Force has a base in Los Angeles. And so when my time in Florida was up, I requested to be transferred to the Los Angeles Air Force Base. Didn't really know what I would be doing. All I knew was that at the Los Angeles Air Force Base, there were a lot of program offices for the space programs that the United States Air Force is involved in. And when I show up, all of a sudden I was assigned to space launch, and I was the new Delta Force structure engineer for the United States Air Force. And so that was incredibly that was incredibly exciting. And oh, looks like I'm presenting to something here.
You okay?
Yep. Okay, here we go. Yeah, that was incredibly exciting. It was like drinking from a fire hose, but that got me into the space industry. It got it's what got me excited about rocket launches. My very first mission in the Air Force, down to Cape Canaveral, experienced rocket launch. I knew from then on I wanted to be in the space industry as much as possible. And it was around that time SpaceX also kind of raised their hand for the United States and wanted to compete for government contracts. So I was part of the first group of officers to go over to SpaceX to start auditing their processes. And when it was, again, my time to kind of rotate out of this space role into something else for the United States Air Force, I decided to kind of jump ship and go over to SpaceX, where it was really exciting. And being so interested in the space industry, I wanted to kind of get an understanding for as many different facets of the industry as possible. I'd done engineering, I had worked on the launch vehicle side, but I had never really been part of spacecraft production. And so that's what I first started doing at SpaceX, was managing the scheduling team for our production of Falcon and Dragon. During that time, getting more involved in the space industry outside of SpaceX. And that's a year after I did that, I started New Space Hub. At the time, it was called New Space Ventures. I got to meet you and a bunch of other people. But it's been a really interesting road. And now I'm on the mission management side on SpaceX, interfacing with our customers, learning about how payloads are integrated with our launch vehicles.
That's fantastic. And how? Got a bit of feedback. Let's see if I can fix that up. I think it's okay now. And how have you found that? You know, like your new promotion that you've got recently. How are you finding that? Is there, I guess, in the short time that you've been doing that, is it much different to what you're doing before? And with SpaceX, I guess, becoming much more of a mature company now, are you finding that I guess the innovative lean side of SpaceX that you started with, is that still there? And how? Yeah, tell us a bit about the culture around that.
The culture of SpaceX is still, and as long as Elon's there, is going to be as lean as possible. As far as I'm concerned, that's certainly, even though that the company has grown, the culture is very much still be as scrappy as possible. Use tools to your advantage. If there's a longer term solution that we can put into place, only do that if absolutely necessary, and try and find a quick workaround in the meantime. So that's really not going away. But in this new role, as I kind of mentioned a few moments ago, it's giving me exposure to a different side of the industry that I hadn't had. The way I've kind of thought about it is, if the launch vehicle is kind of like a bus, just taking passengers to orbit. When I was in the Air Force, I learned a lot about how the military buys rockets, buys the bus. When I first started at SpaceX, I learned how the bus is built. And also when I was in the Air Force, I did console operations. And so I kind of, you know, you can say that I learned about how to drive the bus on the launch vehicle side a little bit, but I've never learned, or I haven't been as involved with how things get onto the bus, or get a ride, a seat on the bus. And so this is giving me exposure to that, and it's very exciting. Never a dull moment.
Yeah, I'm totally sure. What do you like? Do you have like, what do your friends say? You know, are they just so? I guess outside of the US, working for SpaceX is like, seems like, you know, it's on such a pedestal because of ITAR and things like that. It's really hard to get there. So what is the perception of, I guess, people around you, you know, knowing someone that works at SpaceX?
Well, I guess it's I try and bring as much clarity as I can to folks like yourself and other friends and colleagues that are curious about the company. You know, there are obviously things that I can't talk about because I'm not here officially representing SpaceX. You know, I'm just one of many people, but I try and explain things as if I was talking to my friends and family, because, you know, that's and I think SpaceX kind of encourages all of its employees to sort of be ambassadors of space, and it's a bit more difficult now, you know, with ITAR regulations, but employees are allowed to give tours to friends and close family. But we also try and do a lot of STEM outreach to the local community and local elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools. So even though SpaceX might be this, the perception is, you know, it's a very high threshold to get into, exacting standards, you know, holding ourselves to a higher standard. I see a lot of good coming out of SpaceX, and I enjoy talking about not just about what SpaceX is doing, but the vision that SpaceX has. You know, trying to make humans multiplanetary, trying to get to Mars, and that's what I find most exciting outside of work.
Yeah, great. And so I guess this is a great segue, because you mentioned, you know, the fascination around, you know, making humans multiplanetary species and getting to Mars and that sort of thing. Was this something that was incredibly fascinating to you beforehand, or was it something that was obviously, you know, that was, I guess, exciting but you didn't really think about? And how did that, I guess, steer us to what, like, where did the idea, like, when did you first say, all right, I'm really interested in this new space industry that I've just discovered, and I'm going to do something about that?
I I started getting more interested in what this new space industry was back when I started working with SpaceX from the Air Force side. And I knew that SpaceX was this startup that was trying to make rockets and trying to get to Mars. And I didn't really know what other space startups, if any, were out there. And so trying to just starting with a simple Google search of other space companies, and I started putting together my own personal list of all the really interesting companies, not just in the United States, but around the world that were trying to build satellites better and faster, trying to bring satellite internet to people, not building big rockets like SpaceX um, or Blue Origin or anything like that, but trying to build small satellites for the small sat market. And I was like, holy cow, there's this thing called the small sat market. Like I didn't know about those things until I started digging. And what kind of not so much concerned me, but kind of put it into perspective of the sort of bubble that the aerospace industry here in the United States was in, was the fact that when I was talking to my colleagues in the Air Force and some of the other prime contractors, just asking questions like, SpaceX is trying to become a launch provider. Do you know how many other startups are trying to become launch providers or do launch services in the world? And these at the time were industry veterans. Some of the people that I was working with were engineers on the space shuttle and had been around the space industry here in the United States for decades. And they couldn't really say anything besides Virgin Galactic, Blue Origin, and SpaceX. And I knew of a couple dozen more that I had put together on my own personal list just from things coming across my Facebook feed and LinkedIn, and none of them had heard about it. And that's kind of where this idea started forming to put together a database of these space companies, these products and services for this burgeoning new space industry around the world. And it kind of snowballed into this thing that's now called New Space Hub.
Yeah, great. So I stumbled over this article this morning it was in the Guardian, I think, and I didn't get to check whether it was an old one or a more recent one. Sorry, I'll stop and let the echo cancellation kick in. So I was reading an article in the Guardian. Well, actually, I read the headline. I was like, I'm not going to read anything beyond this. It was talking about this new space industry as a playground, in space now as a playground for billionaires. And so I guess this is similar sort of thing that you're talking about, right? You sort of started the New Space Hub because there was all this amazing new stuff happening, but not that many people know about it.
Right.
What do you have to say about is space, I guess, again, you work for SpaceX, and of course, Elon Musk is a billionaire. Space is almost literally a playground for him at this stage. But what do you have to say to that kind of perception that space is just a playground for billionaires?
Well, there's some truth to that still. The barrier to entry to put something into space has certainly been lowered through efforts like SpaceX and more competition in the market. But if you look at the number of launch providers that can get to space currently, it's still quite expensive. It's SpaceX is making it less expensive than it was before, but your average entrepreneur isn't going to have $50 million or plus to get into orbit. So to the extent that if you're trying to get into space or put something into space, it's still a lot more expensive than the average entrepreneur in any other industry would kind of need to get started, right? But what I've seen through the Space Hub is just this opening of the door to what is a space startup. When you talk to most people who think about space entrepreneurship and space startups, you think SpaceX, Elon Musk, Richard Branson, and all of the other, Rocket Lab, Planet that are doing satellites. It's rockets and satellites essentially, or trying to or space mining, so, something like that. But what has really fascinated me in seeing the submissions that come in from around the world into New Space Hub are these other products and services that have really shown that you don't need to be an engineer or a scientist to participate in the space industry in some fashion. You could have studied literature or communications and still participate in the space industry. There are now public relations and marketing companies that are just targeted towards the space industry. There are, you could have studied software engineering, not space science, and there's a huge demand now for software engineers and software developers for parsing Earth observation data and being more intelligent in that regard. There's, even if you studied finance, doing financial analysis using Earth observation data to predict world markets is something that is really being looked at by a lot of the top banks around the world. So I thought that was really, really exciting to see that you don't need to be a scientist or an engineer to do something related to the space industry. And what I've also started noticing through the New Space Hub in talking with these entrepreneurs as well as investors in these space companies, a lot of the bulk of the dollars is going to satellite and rocket startups because they need more money to do those things. It costs more. That's a fact. But the investors who haven't invested in the space industry really like to see kind of a connection between space technology and an industry that they're more familiar with, like using space to help farming or using space to help finance or doing something like that. So it's been really interesting to kind of get a different perspective on this industry that most of the media and the coverage in the world is around, rocket launches.
Yeah, for sure. Wait that second for echo cancellation. All right, third attempt. Almost. Okay, I think we got it now. So yeah, and that's really fantastic, and especially today, this weekend in particular. So in this room, we've got so many people who aren't rocket scientists. I'm sure there are a couple who aren't rocket scientists who are looking at, well, what are these great applications that I can now do in space? And I think Space Apps last year had 25,000 participants all across the world on this weekend, building these great applications using data analytics and a whole range of other things. Which comes off the back of this, the supply chain, where it is about the rockets and satellites upstream from that, but now it's becoming more accessible to all these different people. So I guess off the back of the comments you just made, what advice do you have to people that are looking to get into the space industry that might be from marketing or design, or just totally fields that people just don't think about as being associated to space?
Well, the thing that I would tell them is, how can you help spread space to as many people as possible? If you're not a scientist or an engineer, and you studied something in the humanities, what I think is really exciting about the new space industry, besides not needing to be a scientist or an engineer, it really comes down to this wave of making the average person more aware of space, making them understand how space can help them, or just getting them thinking about space more. I think the average person, the general public around the world, if they kind of have not so much the space industry, but space technology and this understanding that someday humans will be beyond Earth, I think is a good thing for the industry as a whole. If the industry was only talking about rockets and satellites and space wasn't touching or impacting the average person on a day-to-day basis, I don't think there would be nearly as much public support for space efforts. So just as important as it is to make satellites and launches cheaper, I think it's equally as important to get the public interested about space. And on the New Space Hub database, there are a number of consumer-facing companies and products that aren't technical whatsoever, but they do that job of bringing space down to Earth. It sounds cheesy, but bringing space to the average person.
Yeah, for sure. And so I guess if as a quick experiment, so we just spent a little bit of time discussing what we call the Gaddy pitch, which is really about explaining what you're doing in sort of one line. And it's a little bit more than that. But what would you describe as the purpose that you've found for New Space Hub, if you were to have one line?
I would say that New Space Hub is the destination to discover new and lesser known space companies, products, and services from around the world. It's the discovery platform for the space industry.
That's perfect. That's fantastic. So are you up and running? Could we do a little bit of a demo of New Space Hub? So for the people,
Yes.
so we've got a whole bunch of people in this room at the moment here in Melbourne, Australia, and I'm sure there's a bunch of people around the world who would really benefit, especially on this hackathon weekend when you're looking for ideas, you're looking to understand the space industry a lot more. How can we use New Space Hub as a tool for finding out these great problems to solve, and what other people are working on?
Yeah, so I pulled up a few examples. I'm going to kind of walk through the website, what you can find, how you can kind of use it. Let me start out by saying the website is still in its beta form. I started with, at the time it was called New Space Ventures over a year ago, and it was as scrappy as I could think of getting a database of companies, products, and services. It was literally just a shared Google spreadsheet and a free MailChimp newsletter sign up. And through word of mouth, it kind of grew and grew and grew. And it got to the point where people thought it was great, and I needed to turn this into something that was a bit more tangible than a shared Google spreadsheet. So the website is working. It's got over 2,000 entries in the database that people from all over the world have submitted. But it's invite only at the moment, and we've been handing out invite codes like candy. So if you go to New Space Hub right now, you won't be able to log in without an invite code. But Troy, you can give them my New Space Hub email address, and I'd be happy to share invites with anybody who would like one. All I ask is that you provide feedback to me about your experience so we can make this even better. So let me share my screen, and let me know if this works. Okay, so this is the homepage of New Space Hub. It's really simple, trying to also continue to be as scrappy as I can, as simple as possible. The homepage shows in chronological order a list of things that have been added to the database over time. And you can see there are a lot of different kinds of companies, products, and services. We've narrowed it down to 7 overall types of things that are in the database: companies, databases themselves, space events from around the world, different space organizations, products, that either products made by a company or consumer type products, different space programs like university programs or research programs relating to space, and services that the companies have. But clicking any of these would take you over to an individual listing page that describes a little bit more about this product or service, shows you the location in the world where it's at, and it provides other companies, products, or services related to this one. So you can kind of, a lot of investors and entrepreneurs have started to use this to do competitor analysis and market research for some of the ideas that they've had. What are some companies out there that are doing something similar to the idea that they're trying to do? Similar to like Yelp or other databases, you can claim your listing. This whole database is kind of curated by folks like you and me. This wouldn't be possible if it weren't for other people stumbling across something cool or creating something that they want to be added to the database. So anybody can submit an addition that gets validated by either myself or a hand-selected group of validators. But what I really want to show you is the search functionality. So this is the search page on New Space Hub, and you kind of see that there are thousands around the world. Right now in the database, we have over 2,300 entries along all of those different types, but in over 110 unique industry segments that you can really niche down into by type, segment, and geographic location. And being aspiring space entrepreneurs yourselves over there in Australia, I kind of wanted to point out some interesting segments that I think would be really helpful for space entrepreneurs around the world. I kind of use this a lot. There's an entire segment for startup help. And if you look at this one, it brings up 111 different entries ranging from VCs and investors who have historically invested in space companies or specifically invest in space companies. We're talking accelerators and hackathons for space all around the world that can, and resources for entrepreneurs to help get off the ground in your space startup. There's also what I found really cool over the past year and a half of New Space Hub is the segment of, software. So there are actually a ton of software tools out there. If you're trying to do something technical in the space industry, there are a ton of software tools that you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You can use what they already have. And so these are either companies that provide software solutions or free open source software themselves. And wanted to point out one that I've actually played around with a lot, and I think it's really fun. It's called Flight Club. And so this is a free open source launch vehicle simulator where you put in the information of the mission that you're trying to create, and you click run, and it'll give you all the plots and all the data. And so this one is like for a Falcon Heavy demo mission, and you can simulate it right here, and it does all of the rocket science for you essentially. And it's really cool. Another one that has been really helpful for a lot of people that I know is NASA here in the United States actually has an entire open source database of a ton of their software that you can use. I haven't even dug into this even just a little bit, but there's a lot of tools and resources that NASA has made themselves that you can now use yourself, which is really cool for space entrepreneurs to use. Jumping back, Troy, to the point that you don't need to be a scientist or engineer to be in the space industry. There's a growing number here on New Space Hub of consumer products that do this, that bring space down to earth for people. Like this one, Apes in Space, epic space posters. And it's exactly as it describes. It's somebody who has a love for space, who created something to share that love with other people. And it's space posters of really cool launches or Hubble Space Telescope images, vintage space posters. That's what I mean when getting the average person more involved in the space industry in some small way, getting them thinking about space more. There's another one. Oh yeah, and JPL here in California has this open source rover that you can build a tiny miniature rover, just like the one on Mars, using, I think it's a small Arduino board. Space-time coordinates is another one that's very creative. And this, you give space-time coordinates like your birth date or an anniversary, and it'll plot what the solar system looked like on coasters, on posters, and it really makes for a very nice keepsake for your friends, family, loved ones. A lot of people don't think that these are space-related companies because they're not rockets or satellites. But like I've been saying, I think those are just as important to the space industry is providing this this tangible connection for the average person to space. How is that?
That's fantastic. What do you all think? Yeah, good. Jack, that's really, really good. So I guess I know that that particular version's in a beta version. Is the old list still available? Like, if we've got people around the world that want to use it this weekend, is there any way to access the database at the moment?
Yes. So actually, let me just go back to this really quick. So even if you don't yet have an invite code, if you go to New Space Hub and you click the menu on the right, the menu is always available even if you're not logged in. Down at the bottom, there's this link to the old spreadsheet, and that'll take you over to the Google Sheet in the meantime.
Fantastic. So I'm sure there's tons of people that are about to go away and start looking into this, and hopefully you get some more contributors and some more projects to put in this database. What's next for New Space Hub? What are you working on at the moment, and what do you see it becoming in, say, 2 years and 5 years time?
That's a great question, and where I see New Space Hub going, the vision that I have for this, as the reason why I changed the name from New Space Ventures to New Space Hub is the intent of it becoming, the resource for this burgeoning space industry, and a big part of that is bringing in a lot more features that will make this a lot more valuable to space entrepreneurs, as well as people that are trying to support space entrepreneurs, like investors, journalists, analysts. So the vision is, if you're familiar with like Crunchbase or AngelList or Product Hunt, kind of like not exactly any of those platforms, but kind of a combination of all of those, but for the space industry. And one of the things that isn't on the public-facing side at the moment, but what I've been building up on the back end with the help of a number of other people, is a financial picture of the space industry. So we've been pulling in financial data of funding rounds and investments of these space companies since about 2002. And so we've been building this space funding and investment data. So we're going to be using that as an additional feature on the site. The end result really being a place where space entrepreneurs can discover cool things and show off what they're working on, and for space enthusiasts to discover things that they didn't know existed, and investors and analysts to find really cool and interesting opportunities and people around the world. We're also building in a kind of not so much a chat feature, but a connection feature. That's one of the things that's one of the feedbacks that we receive the most, is either an investor finds a really interesting company that they want to know more about and they want to contact somebody at that company, or a space entrepreneur sees another company that an investor has invested in and kind of wants to either talk to that entrepreneur that received the funding, ask them, how that went, what they did, or reach out to that investor themselves. So we're going to be building and turning this hopefully into as much of a hub, an actual hub for the space industry as possible.
That all sounds fantastic. Thank you so much for your time, Jack. And especially thank you so much. I think it's coming up till about 8:30 p.m. in your time. So thanks for joining us all the way from LA. Everybody, could you please give Jack a round of applause? I know you can't see them, Jack. I can't turn the camera around, but
it's all right.
at least you can hear them. But thank you so much. And for anybody tuning in or watching this later on, thanks so much for joining us. And check out the new Space Hub. Thank you very much, everyone, and good night and good day and good luck for Space Apps. Thank you very much.
Have a great rest of the weekend. Thanks, everybody.
All right.